is up, everybody? Welcome to Sessions with J Cal. I'm J Cal, but with us tonight is another J. That would be this gentleman sitting next to me right here, Jay Stone. Jay, are you alive, man? Hey, Jay. Hey, Jay, we're on. Hey, Jay. Oh, this is embarrassing. And there he goes. Well, hopefully Jay will be back here in just a moment. I don't know what happened. But let me give you a little bit of history with Jay Stone, and let me tell you about my history with Jay Stone. Jay Stone was a referee here in the Southern California area. In fact, he worked all over the West Coast. You might have seen him in wrestling promotions like Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. You might have seen him in the Empire Wrestling Federation. You might have seen him in wrestling, Paragon Pro Wrestling out of Las Vegas. You might have seen him at West Coast Wrestling Connection in the up in Oregon. And I think we got Jay back now. Let me see.
Sorry about that.
Jay, are you there?
I am. I'm here. I'm live. I'm ready to kill it.
You were frozen there, but you didn't look frozen. You just looked like you were gazing off in maybe like the sunset, or maybe your wife walked by. I don't know. You were frozen, and I was like, oh shh. What are we gonna do?
Well, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I live about 45 miles outside of Portland in this wine country city called McMinnville. And there's only like one or two internet providers in the area because the whole county only has 90,000 people in it. The city is literally only 5 times larger than the high school that I graduated from in Los Angeles. So there's 2 internet providers. There's Comcast and there's like Ziply, which is the fiber. And I had to go that route, but it's a huge house. So like, I just totally flexed on that, by the way.
I know, right? That didn't fall on my deaf ears there. He's like, yeah, I got this big house, man. It's hard to keep the Wi-Fi working.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry. Let's try that intro one more time, buddy. We'll just call it on the fly and do the second time, ready?
Yeah, we're calling it on the fly. Well, first of all, Jeff Capo says hi to you.
Hi, Jeff.
Jeff was on just a few weeks ago. We had some great NWA conversations, some ECW conversation. Willie Bowen wants to know, did you ever referee in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla? I don't know that. Did you?
Oh, no, I did not.
Source
okay, I guess we're starting the conversation early.
We're just here, man.
Yeah, so I was actually supposed to, and the gentleman whose name, I guess, is not being said very much in pro wrestling right now because he's kind of
Yeah,
that guy.
The pariah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. He was going to book me, and then some stuff came up that we'll talk about a little bit later, but basically I didn't make the most friends of the PWG crew, specifically Drake, younger. So I ended up getting removed from that. But
he turned out to be a real piece of shit too, huh?
Oh, I still feel bad for him. You know what? Drake had a lot of demons. Look, I'm going to sit here and defend him as a recovering addict, that he had a lot of demons in him.
Yeah.
Man, don't wear your NXT gear when you're going to go full that crap crazy. Just don't do it.
Look,
you're going to
Here's the thing, right? We could all have a conversation about politics, and maybe my views are different than yours, and maybe yours are different than mine, and maybe the people watching have different views, and that's all okay. That's all great. But you can't represent your company or the company that you work for in that environment. No. And I'm a small business owner, Jay, and I even consider this, the Alliance Wrestling, I consider this a brand and a business as well. You'll never hear me on this channel go into my deep morals and ethical thoughts. I won't talk to you about religion. I won't talk to you about politics or any of that stuff.
No need to. And look, that's the great thing about pro wrestling. And that's what I loved and still love, even all these years later, is that, and unfortunately it has started to bleed into it, which is a whole other discussion, but I always loved that pro wrestling was this escape. and it was completely separate from all the craziness in the world. I mean, granted, the most over wrestler in the history of wrestling was as a result of politics and the political landscape in the 80s, but I still like the fact that it's so separate and has such a great ability to keep your brain from digressing into those kinds of thoughts. And so, to answer the question, no, I was never on Pro Wrestling Gorilla, but the first time I ever saw a wrestling show live was a PWG show. And that was actually what got me hooked on the wrestling industry. And within literally days after that show, I was training at Rick Drazen's school. So PWG will always be my home. And if I have any regrets in the industry, which I got to do so much, not reffing in PWG was probably the biggest regret I have, more than anything, because that was my home. We would go there every month for shows for years prior to.
So you said that was the first place you saw live wrestling. So you didn't go to a WWF show or a WCW show?
No. So in fact, I didn't even know that wrestling was really a thing until 2000. I actually went to New York for a trip, and I got really bad food poisoning on the flight. And I ended up staying in the hotel in downtown New York instead of going out to dinner. And for whatever reason, the people that were using the TV before me had been watching UPN. And I turned it on, and there's Eddie Guerrero, rest in peace. And I literally watched 30 seconds of him cutting a promo. It was like the whole. It was right after him and JBL, or right leading up to him and JBL, I think. And I got hooked. I got super hooked. That must have been 2003. I don't remember. It was a really long time ago.
So were you a late teenager?
Yeah, I was 15, 16 when I.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something I never knew about you. You didn't grow up a fan of wrestling.
I did not. In fact, I was a theater kid, and so it seemed like a pretty reasonable transition to move.
Oh, for sure.
So I instructed martial arts for a couple of years prior to getting into wrestling, and I had to work with kids, or not had to, I got to work with kids, but I had to make them feel like they were actually getting something out of it, so I would sell the shit out of things. And and he said, and so one thing kind of just led to it was a series of very weird events that kind of brought me into this position. I mean, even being in Oregon, life is weird, man. But yes, I got into wrestling, really into wrestling when I was about 14, 13, and I just got hooked. I mean, you get it.
Yeah.
You get hooked, and it's impossible to not love it. The real first program I really got into was JBL Eddie. That was like the one that got me stuck into wrestling.
And that's almost when I took a break from wrestling, to be honest with you. I grew up in the 80s, right? So I was hooked to Hulkamania. We watched WrestleMania 2 live on DirecTV on pay-per-view. And it was in 3 different locations, and it was such a weird, crazy time. And then like in the late 90s when I was a teenager, it's like I think I'm done with wrestling, and then they bring in this whole thing called the cruiserweight division in WCW, and I'm hooked right back in again. And then I'm getting ready to stop watching wrestling because I'm getting ready to be a dad and having kids and stuff. And then all of a sudden, nope, right back into it with independent wrestling. It's wild. So
the part that I loved the most about that era was it wasn't that great. Let's be honest here, but there were some great acts within that late. Like I used to love watching Kenzo Suzuki and Rene Dupree, as corny as it was, or like the Saturday Night Velocity with like Gregory Helms beating up on random like cruiserweights. There's just something really entertaining about it.
There was a point in time where I remember watching a very young Bryan Danielson, the American Dragon, taking on John Cena in a matchup that was like on Heat, or maybe it was Velocity. And I was like, holy crap, that's Bryan Danielson. And, being somebody that went to those same PWG shows that you were probably at, Danielson was always one of my guys. So seeing him on WWE programming, and that's never would expect him to years later be their champion, So your first wrestling show is going to PWG. I mean, that's quite an introduction because Pro Wrestling Gorilla obviously is one of the Yeah, I think the expression is work rate wrestling promotions, where
Mm-hmm.
you're there for the wrestling. There's not a whole lot of storyline built into it. It's more about the
Mm-hmm.
performance in the ring. What about that got you hooked, and how did that transition you from being the person sitting there watching the show to wanting to be involved in the show?
So for me, the first main event I ever saw, just for reference, was Pac Steen, and they beat the out of each
Who
other.
was it?
Pac and Kevin Steen.
Oh yeah.
So they beat the crap out of each other. And there's actually a video online of them Holy Diver Down. That was a show. And I remember being in the front row with, this is going to be a name that will, as an EWF person, Brandon Parker.
Yeah. King of Strikes.
Yeah, the King of Strikes. Oh my God, that Hollywood Undead. Every time I hear Hollywood Undead, my eye starts to twitch out. So it was a really easy transition. I got hooked on that show. There was Danielson was on that show. Claudio was on the show. Sorry, I don't know what he calls himself now because of
Cesaro.
Cesaro. There we go. I don't know if he's still calling himself Cesaro. I meant post leaving. But anyways, he was on that show. Candice was on the show very early on. Chris Hero was on the show, and I think it was a natural transition for me. I was a theater guy originally, and then I got into martial arts, and it was the combination of the two. It's the pomp and circumstance which really got me. I mean, there's something so innately awesome about wrestling, specifically when it comes to the theater portion of it. I just could not get past how cool it was that these dudes, that a lot of them just look like bodybuilders, had so much personality and could talk like nobody's business. And as a theater person, it's incredible to see somebody that can communicate without having to just use their bodies. It's like it became beyond just somebody kicking the other person. It was like a really incredible dance routine. And there's something so cathartic about watching two people, and it's giving me goosebumps just talking about it. It's so cathartic watching two people when they are so in tune with each other that you forget that your whole world exists. You completely forget that everything else outside is relevant. And that's what got me hooked. And specifically, thank you to Kevin Steen, because that dude did not look like he should have been in wrestling, and I don't look like I should have been in wrestling. I'm 5'11", but
shut up, dude. You're not short. You can't say that. Not when we got people on the show who are only 5'8", man. Shut up.
I felt short. Skinny guy. And you've got Kevin Steen, who does not look like the stereotypical guy, doing backflips. So it became pretty easy, and I went every month. It transitioned into a much bigger deal. And then I found Rick Drazen School, because I'm originally from Woodland Hills. And
there was a point in time, and now this is very telling on my part, because I get it now today. The beard, I don't know, the round face. A lot of people think I look like Kevin Owens, but I thought when I didn't have the beard and he didn't have the beard, and he was wrestling in singlets, and then those only a few years before I was high school wrestling in singlets, we looked a lot like then too, except for I didn't, he's a lot bigger than me, taller, not fatter, but
So I transitioned immediately not immediately, but relatively quickly from that show into Rick Drazen School.
The Equalizer, Rick Drazen. For those of you who don't know that name, real quick, let me do a little bit on Rick Drazen, because he's like a SoCal icon. He wrestled at the old Grand Olympic Auditorium. He's more known for being the in-between for Bruce Banner to the Incredible Hulk on the old TV show. They called him the Demi Hulk, and he played that role of like the transition. And that's where he was famous from. He also designed the logo for, what's it? Gold's Gym. Thank you.
Yep.
And the guy's literally was a SoCal luminary. I always wish that the SoCal scene would have embraced him more as he got older. It's a shame that he never really seemed to kind of fit in anywhere. And it's like I used to tell Dave Marquez, like, can't you find something for him, like commentary, GM, or something? It's like, I can't afford the guy. But
Yeah, he was not cheap.
no,
He
but
was not cheap.
he was great. I know that he passed away a few years ago, and
Yeah,
good dude. But like I said, he was like one of the guys. I mean, he wasn't ever the world's greatest wrestler, but he did
uh-huh.
train a lot of people besides you, Jay. I mean, he also trained Jungle Boy.
Yeah,
He also trained Luchasaurus, I do believe, too, right?
yeah, yeah.
And
He had a lot of people that went through his school. Remember Anchors Away? They were the people that I trained under, specifically Andy. Trevor wasn't really around much, but Andy was there a
see,
lot.
I thought those guys were trained by Mike Rapata.
They were, but he was doing some training of people at the school when I was there.
Okay.
Yeah, no, he wasn't trained by Rick Drazen. Him and Rick knew each other,
Okay.
and it's a very small scene in that part of SoCal. Um, just because for whatever reason, a lot of the guys, you look at somebody like Kaz, and I know he's from the Midwest, but I think everybody from SoCal considers Chris Daniels to be a SoCal guy, even though he's not from SoCal
Yeah,
technically.
Chicago.
Yeah, I thought he was from Wisconsin. But anyways, yeah, somewhere from the Midwest. Um, Regardless, Rick was that guy. Rick was the starting for everybody. And I think if you had passed through SoCal between like 94 and 2010, 2011, you would have been through Rick Drazen's school.
Or Jesse in San Bernardino.
Or Jesse. And I also trained at Jesse's school as well. I almost died in Jesse's ring. Not to shoot. I almost died in Jesse's ring.
Let's talk more about Rick, and then we'll get CEWF
yeah.
in a minute.
So Rick actually sent me a rather lengthy email telling me that I didn't belong in the industry and that I should probably quit. And of course, me being the great person that I am, I went, no, you, I'm going to do it just to spite you. And I love Rick Drazen for that reason, because I should have listened to him. I didn't belong in the wrestling industry as a wrestler. Let's make that abundantly clear. I had no business being a wrestler. I'm about as athletically inclined as a square wheel. So being a referee was was a perfect blend for me. But I think that if he had not told me basically to fuck off, and yes, I did bleep myself, then I probably would have quit the industry. I probably would have quit the industry because I was not meant to be a wrestler.
But you did get a few matches in, right? Like, weren't you at the APW like Young Lions show?
I ref that one. I did wrestle 3 shows though. Or 2 shows. I had one at NAW where I just randomly showed up with all red gear. It was really, really offensive. Like, I basically dressed up like a Blood in Hayward, and got the beat out of me by Brandon Bonham. And then I did this whole program for Epic War for Gary Yap, and I wrestled against Virgil Flynn, unfortunately, rest in peace, Virgil, and Johnny Suave in a triple threat match that culminated with me getting my ass whooped by Ryan Katz's group of USSR people. He was playing like a USSR character, and he had like a red USSR mask on at the New Hall venue.
I don't recall any of this.
Yeah, and in fact, I was supposed to take a table bump, and Ryan was like, there's no way that we're having some essentially yarder who's been trained for 6 months go through a table. So instead, they gave me like 8 clotheslines. I got like 3 concussions, and I've lost like a year of my memory from around that time. But for sure, they made Virgil take the table bump, and he's like, oh man, I got to work my shoot job tomorrow, but fine. Yeah, but Ryan had a whole group of like, they taped a bag over my head, nearly choked me out because I didn't know to put my hands up. Like, sorry to break kayfabe. Talk about the wall being there. It's kind of ironic, but I didn't know to put my hands up over my head. So I'm like, there's like a part of the video where I'm like legit fighting a bunch of tape, trying to like get myself from passing out. And the thought in my head was, if I get any closer to passing out, I'm going to powder out of this ring, and I'm going to go to the locker room, and someone's going to get me out of this, because I was like starting to get woozy. So yeah, I had a couple of matches before I decided to become a referee, and that was thanks to training with Super Dragon's cousin, Ronan, who relentlessly beat the shit out of me for no other reason than he was trying to get me out of the industry. I was kind of in that last group of people where they were trying to get people out, and trading has changed a lot now.
Yeah.
But when I was there, they used to beat the crap out of us. I mean, to the point where at Santino's they had a place called Puke Alley. So
yeah.
I digress. But anyways, yes.
So when you got to Santino's, then was that?
It wasn't even Santino's yet.
Help me on the timeline. So you leave Rick Drazen's school. Where do you show up next? Is that where you go to Santino's?
I went to Santino. So no, actually, I went to Venus Fighting Essence, which was
Charles Mercury.
Charles Mercury. Charles, if you're listening, I love you, man.
I love Charles too. He's a great dude.
Great dude, and I'm so glad that he's got his life. He's got his life going. I thought I was convinced that him and Jarrell were going to kill each other in the ring, like legit. They suplexed each other from the top rope to the floor through a bunch of chairs, like. So I did a short period of time at Venus, and in between that, Joey was trying to get a school started, and Joey and Charles knew each other from XPW days, and so they were starting school in their backyard in Chino Hills, I think it was Chino Hills, and it was like 105 degrees out all the time. And
like El Monte, dude. I don't think it was Chino Hills.
I don't. It's been almost a decade since I moved to Oregon. I don't remember what cities are in California anymore. And also, my brain is kind of screwed up.
Chino Hills is kind of like a ritzy area. I don't think they would have allowed the Backyard Wrestling Federation there.
Yeah. So I went Drazen's, Santino's, and Venus Fighting Essence sort of in conjunction. I found out real quick that I wasn't just fit to be a wrestler, and that was when I transitioned to Jesse's because I wanted to be a referee. And
do you remember who was with you at Santino's? Like,
yeah, Ray, Jesse Noguera, who's known as the Joker or Joke, Pinky, Eli, the very, very famous Lucky O'Shea. Brandon Parker, Charles Mercury, Jarrell Marcus the Riot Diaz. That's about all I can remember. I got
He's
so many
Enoch the Enlightened now.
Yeah, sorry. Jarrell, we're cool. I appreciate you, boo. Jarrell was there. Supreme was there. There's actually a photo of me getting the shit chopped out of me by Supreme, and I look really awful. Like I'm sitting here like this. And
it's Supreme, dude.
Okay, so to be fair, of all the guys I've ever wrestled that had a reputation, Supreme was scary as shit, but he was so safe.
I'm sure.
The snot out of you, but he knew what he was doing. Like he didn't take advantage of you like certain other guys do. Excuse me.
I didn't catch the names. You might want to do that again. I know I saw Supreme lots of times, and I'm sure he was very, very safe, but he was also very, very intimidating, and what he did in the ring looked extremely believable.
It was very believable. In fact, the first time I ever took a superplex was from him, and he goes, "Just shut up and breathe." And I went, and off the top rope, and that it felt like I was landing on a balloon. I mean, he was a big guy, so all of his moves felt like you were landing on a pillow, and he was super. The thing that he taught me was and I'll remember this the rest of my life. The hardest forearm to your back is 100 times lighter than the lightest bump. And it's true. It's true. So he could punch me as hard as he wanted, and it would feel 100 times lighter than until he punches you square in the teeth. But so there was a lot of people that went through Santino's. Ray was there. Peter would actually train with me at Venus Fighting Essence, and then also the Buck showed up there, and Brandon and his brother. I don't remember what Cutler's brother, Dustin.
Yeah,
Dustin Cutler was there. That was also where all the Battleground guys trained.
So like Tito and
no, Tito trained at Santino's. Tito and Che were like second generation Santino guys. So they moved from the backyard to that really awesome like garage feeling venue that they have. and that was when Che and Tito and Eli really came into his own. And I'm so glad that that dude is killing it because he had so much talent even when we were training. That whole group was 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 cultivated by Joey, and Sylvia needs so much credit for that place blowing up like it did.
That group produced so many rookie of the years, and I mean, we're talking. You brought up Eli Everfly, but Brody King, Jake Atlas,
Yep.
a lot of dudes that came through there. Um, just real great wrestlers. But let's
Oh,
move.
totally.
Let's move further east out to San Bernardino,
Yep.
where you were training with Jesse Hernandez, who is a bit of a cultural icon out here in Southern California as well. Being that he worked with the AWA, he was responsible for bringing Louis Spicoli into the world of professional wrestling. Did a lot of work with AAA down in Mexico. Also worked with the WWE as a referee. Worked at the worked with Gorman and Black Gorman and Goliath, and
Yes.
at the Grand Olympic Auditorium. He's definitely the elder statesman in Southern California when it comes to pro wrestling, and he is still training people to this day. Tell me about your experiences when you walked into the hallowed halls of the Hard Knocks.
Oh man, so that was when. So after I decided I wanted to become a referee, I started working shows at IWL, but I was working like once a month.
Well, that was
And
with Vic Luna.
yeah. And Vic gave me a lot of opportunities early on, but I wasn't really ready at that point. I didn't even have black socks. My referee shirt was not tucked in. Like I was not. I looked like a backyard wrestler trying to be a referee. There's a photo of Watts and Chimera against the Bucks, and I'm wearing one of those like ridiculous like typing arm braces, and like my shirt's literally like twice the size of my body. I look like a 12-year-old kid trying to be a basketball referee. And I had only been working those shows for about 6 months when I moved over to Jesse's because it had a lot to do with the time at Santino / Venus Fighting Essence when I was getting my ass whooped like 6 days a week. And I would drive from Woodland Hills to, where's Catella Drive off of? Is that in like out in your neck of the woods?
Where were you at?
Catella Drive. It was off the 405, I think. I don't remember. It was like Orange County.
Catella is Orange County. That's not really near me either. But yeah, and for those of you who aren't from LA, like that's on a good day that's about an hour. On a bad day, that could be like a 3-hour drive.
Yeah, for sure. I paid my dues, brother. Paid my dues, brother. There we go.
You made your towns.
Yeah, I made my towns. So I used to drive that like 4 to 5 times a week between Santino's and Venus Fighting Essence. Jesse's was like, for mileage time, was about 140 miles each day. So I used to drive 3 hours twice a week, and I would stay at another referee's house. And that distance was killer. And then when I got hurt in 07, when I got hurt in 2013, I had to drive that 3-hour drive by myself with a torn neck, a torn rotator cuff, a severed labrum, and 63 micro tears down my arm. And I had to drive that with one arm from San Bernardino to Woodland Hills to go to the hospital. But my health insurance wasn't good enough to be able to use a hospital in Covina, in West Covina. So I had to drive from West Covina to San Bernardino to get my stuff, and then drive all the way back from San Bernardino to Woodland Hills. And every time I had to turn left, I would pass, or turn right, I would pass out from the pain. Because I was involved in an angle where Extreme Loco was beating up everybody, and I got X5'd, and my shirt got caught on my arm. And so when I landed like this on my arm and tore everything.
Wow.
So
any hard feelings?
No, I love Harvey. I have no hard feelings. Look, the thing about it is that I take those as my war wounds. I had a lot of anger towards the whole situation, which was directed towards my feeling that the wrestling culture was very backwards. And that was, there's no reason to intentionally hurt somebody. And I felt like I was intentionally hurt. because I said I had the audacity to say no. And that was where my hard feelings came in. My feelings towards Jesse and specifically black metal were at the time really based in the fact that I felt like I was trying to make a name for myself on my own, and I didn't prescribe to the concept of a home, right? I just kind of jumped from wherever I wanted to go, and I think that that was what caused the majority of the issue, because wrestling is very, very much
tribal,
stick around with, very tribal. Yeah. And I didn't prescribe to that. I even remember a time when we were doing a Saturday morning class, and I took a gig at Knox Pro, and they were heated that I was going to a booking. And Jesse asked me, "How much are you getting paid?" And I said, "0. It's the opportunity to work for Rikishi." And I think that I made a lot of enemies. I made a lot of enemies because I never really listened to anybody's advice. And I think had I shut up and listened more, I would have been a lot more successful. But I just never listened to people's advice. And so I just jumped around. I would just get in my car and just drive. I would drive to Arizona. I would drive to NorCal. I would drive to wherever the people needed me to be. And I don't think that that made me a lot of friends, to be honest. In fact, it made me a lot of friends.
Yeah, not at all. And I don't think I ever told you this specifically, but the first time you and I came into knowing each other, and you know the story.
Yes.
I knew who you were. You didn't know who I was. And I was sitting there at SoCal Pro Wrestling ringside, and you kept walking around. "Hey, does anyone know who J Cal is?" And I just sat there. Like, I don't want to talk to this guy. What does this guy want? And I completely no-sold you. I was like Homer Simpson going back into the bushes. And
I love that joke.
And later I told you this, and we had a laugh about it. But yeah, I mean, because you kind of had that negative perception. And I mean, you were just filming at SoCal Pro. You weren't even really working there. You were just, helping out with filming the matches.
Yeah. And that was after I screwed up my shoulder. So I actually could have become a quad out of that injury. I've never publicized that, but that injury was bad enough. The doctors told me that had I fallen a couple of centimeters further to the right, I'd be a quad right now.
Wow.
And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I just had a very big mouth. And look, I'm the first person to admit it, that it wasn't like, my issue was I felt like a lot of the time I got ostracized for simply caring or showing that I gave a shit about the industry.
Yeah.
I didn't take it as a work. I took it as a shoot. Like, a referee should intentionally not know the finish. Because I feel like if you're still a worker. Like, I'm not going to blast out like, "Hey, this is what," but I'm essentially the dead body in the back of CSI. No one gives a about the referee, right? Like, no one comes to watch the referee. Let's be abundantly clear here.
Right.
But the body at the back of the CSI episode doesn't get up and go, "Hey guys, this is scripted." Like, we all know that it's a work. But I felt like it was my job to further the shoot, and that didn't make a lot of friends, because there was a couple times where guys would go into a finish and I would, fuck it up because I was trying to be too shoot, and I think it had to do with who I was trained by, which had.
Did you ever in the middle of a match change the finish because they fucked up or they didn't? That happened quite often.
3 times in my career in 12 years, but yes, probably way more often than it should have. In retrospect.
But you know what? I've talked to other wrestling promoters. I mean, that's one of the cool things that doing this podcast is I've spoken to promoters, I've spoken to wrestlers, I've spoken to referees, and the general consensus is like, "Hey, man, if you don't get your S in, like, we'll take care of it for you." Like you would hear. I'm sure you remember hearing Adam Pearce talk about Dark City Fight Club and Ring of Honor. If people were out there messing around, they'll send Dark City.
John Davis would murder he almost killed me too. He fucking powerbombed me into a turnbuckle. That dude was no joke.
I saw video of that. You shared that with me. I popped hard for you. Sorry. So
did my shoulder. Hi-oh.
Oh, see, you had to break the kayfabe there. So okay, so you're working with Jesse. Yeah. I know there was heat at some point between you and Justin, but you guys kind of seem to to hash
We
that out.
squashed that. We squashed that shit quick. Justin and I think mine was mostly because of this, and Justin's very old school, and we squashed that. Justin, I swear to God, is the best referee I have ever met. He's so talented.
I love that guy too. Like, and again, this isn't supposed to be love fest, right? But he's one of those guys who, like, he puts in the work, man. He's a good dude. He's a good human being. So
part of my issue, the major portion of it had to do with the fact that I was not part of the clique that was involved there, and I had said no to a couple of angles that were supposed to be involving me. I got bumped around a lot because I wasn't very well liked. And so that ended up being a thing that happened several times where I got bumped around. And ultimately, you know, I think part of it had to do with where the industry was at the time. And part of it was because I was really immature. And so what ended up happening was there was a couple of times where I just got my ass whooped in the ring. And I even remember the incident where with the X5, Mondo even said on commentary, "Hey, this is what you get for saying no." And I went, okay. So it's one of those things that the industry has a lot of dark secrets to it. And I just had the capacity to piss people off. I swear to God, it's probably ironic that I dressed up as X-Pac for fucking Halloween, because I was the heat seeker of all heat seekers. I had X-Pac heat because I just never shut up, which is probably what I'm going to get out of this. But
so you would say your time at the EWF wasn't your best years in the wrestling, right?
No, it wasn't. It was not. And if Jesse or Jake or Black Metal, whatever you want to call them, hears this is not a shot at them. It was a shot at the situation at that time.
You know,
the way that the industry was.
I would never ever try to speak for either one of those guys, but knowing them, the little that I do know, I would say I know Jake fairly well. I don't think anything you said would be offensive to him at all. I don't think anything you said is incendiary at all. You're telling your story from your viewpoint, from your perspective, and not once have you said anything derogatory about any of the performers or any of the officials or anything. So I don't
never do that. I would never do that. I want to be abundantly clear that this is my perspective. The one thing that we can all agree on is that all of these guys bust their ass, literally.
For sure.
And there are guys that, and well, I'm sort of taking the cart before the horse, but that's one of the big reasons why I left the industry. Was I got tired of going to funerals. I got tired of seeing people that I grew up idolizing, Eddie and Percy. God, I'm going to start crying. Every time I say his name, I start to get teary-eyed. But having to go to funerals and losing guys week in and week out, it got really, really old really quick. But anyways, that's so I had about a year and a half of WWF, and then that was when I actually started doing shows in Oregon, because I met Morty Litchitz.
Now, okay, well, you were doing matches for Championship Wrestling from Hollywood too.
Yes, I was on the first show ever. Yeah.
When did you get to, timelines wise, and I'm going to jump around here a bit because I don't know 100% of the history, but at what point did you get out to Florida?
Florida was in 2012. I did 6 months at the Dudley, or 4 months at the Dudleys. I actually met the referee who was really good friends with Bubba Ray through Wrestling Cares. Remember that? Wrestling Cares?
Oh, yeah.
Remember? Yeah. It was supposed to be like a charity gimmick, and they had this guy with just an ungodly amount of money he was like the first guy to book Adam Page. When Adam Page became like Adam Page, as opposed to like pick Adam Page. He was doing that like he had like John Deere on his tights.
Like the John Deere hat, right?
Yes, except it was like Adam Page, and he worked. Oh my God.
He worked Pearce.
He worked Pearce. That's what it was. He worked Pearce, and that whole thing. I don't think people realize that Wrestling Cares blew Adam Page's career out of the fucking water. They were so responsible. And which is crazy, because it was like 3 shows. If those shows had been on the East Coast, dude, they would have sold 5,000 tickets immediately. That place would have been popping. But for some reason, SoCal just was not the right place for that.
What
So,
it is there's resentment and like ego, right? Because if Pro Wrestling Gorilla would have picked Johnny Gargano versus Adam Cole, that the Globe or even Reseda would have been packed, right?
oh, 1,000 people, legit 1,000 people,
But
easily.
you put that in the what was it, the
I don't remember.
it was like a boys and girls club or like a
Oh,
it just didn't have the same cachet and nobody cared. And that guy
no.
spent a lot of money. Like look, man, I'm not going to break some trade secrets here, but I was running SoCal Uncensored. Then he was paying for advertising. He paid for us to go and cover it.
I
And it
didn't
was
know
like,
he paid
holy
for you
shit,
guys.
man.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So I ended up meeting uh I ended up meeting a lot of guys from wrestling out of Wrestling Cares, and then I ended up moving to Florida for 6 months, and that was the wildest experience. Bubba Ray, that is not a gimmick. That is 100% Bubba Ray. That is 100% a shoot. In fact, I saw a guy get thrown out of the school for doing a top rope move during a beginner's class. Like like the guy was doing the frog splash, and Bubba Ray threw his crap out of the venue and said, "Get the fuck out of my school!" And I was like, "What am I getting myself into?" Um, Bubba Ray's father-in-law is the creator of American Gladiators, so he's like 72 years old, or he was 72 at the time that I was there. 27-inch biceps. The dude's arms were bigger than my chest.
You're saying Bully Ray's dad?
Ex-father-in-law.
Oh,
Yeah, ex-father-in-law was the Apache Dan was his name, or is his name. I think he's still alive. Apache Dan is his name. 72 years old. That dude could do one-arm push-ups. He was a lunatic.
let me ask you this. That
Yes.
class that you were with, because I recently seen some light shined on the 3D Academy,
Yes.
specifically because of the NWA Women's Wrestling
Yep.
Champion
Yep.
Camille, who got her start there, and
Yep.
as well as Killian King, who recently challenged for the title. Were either one of them there when you were training, or was that after you?
No, that was way after me. So he was. This is when they still had their school in Florida. I think he's got his school now in Pittsburgh or Philly or
I think it's New Hampshire.
New Hampshire. Okay. So the guys that were in my school were, or the guys that were there when I was there, was the only ones of real name would be. Oh my God, she just married Keith. Oh my God, the guy who's in AEW came from WWE.
Mia
Big
Yim.
actor. Mia Yim. Mia Yim was there. Leah Bates was there. John Cruz was there. John Davis showed up a couple of times. There was a lot of guys from Florida that were there. He recently came out of the closet, and he's had a really good Sparrow. Sparrow was in my training class.
Pero P.
Sparrow was in my training class as well, and so was a couple of other guys of note. One is the guy who wears Serpentino. He wears the mask in AEW.
Okay.
There's a couple of guys that had really good careers. The thing about the Dudley School is it is extremely difficult to get into, and it's even harder to stay in. They are very old school. Like they had us training there in 130-degree heat without any fans in it. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, Serpentico. And they had us training in the heat. I can tell you something for sure. I will never get blown up doing drills worse than I did in a 110-degree. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm being serious. Between 110 130-degree heat, and Bubba did not believe in fans like air conditioning. So we were in the Orlando heat during one of the hottest summers on record, inside of a 35 by about 50 venue room, running bump and feed drills.
Ooh.
It was hell on wheels, and I was the referee. I was the only referee there that was training.
So was there a puke alley at this establishment?
There was actually a trash can outside the back of the venue, or not the venue, outside the back of the school.
Yeah.
And they used to have everybody, which I thought was really cool, it's like a throwback to Japan. They used to have everybody sweep the ring, and if you were the young boy, which was I was when I was there, they had you sweep up the ring. They had you work all of the different things. So like you had to clean up you had to retape the ropes. You had to redo the buckles. It was very old school. And what was cool about it was it was right when Bubba started his Bully Ray gimmick. So you got to see him be there every week. And then all of a sudden he blew up, and he was gone for months on end. And then that was when Devon stopped wrestling. Devon is the coolest person. If I can give anybody advice, seek him out, train under Devon. He is out of everybody I've trained under, I can say that I learned more from Devon in 3 months than I learned from anybody. He is so smart about the wrestling industry. It is ridiculous how much knowledge that man has in one brain.
Now, you had said earlier that it was really hard to get into that school, even harder to stay there. You weren't there for forever. You weren't there for an extremely long time. And I remember you coming back to California, and I remember you being kind of bummed, like, oh, man, I'm coming back. But, yeah, feria, the dinero.
It was expensive. It was expensive. And I was working at Publix, which is sort of like, for people on the West Coast, kind of like working at Safeway.
Yeah.
And I was working as a chicken cook. Oh, also, you know who was also at that school was Jesse Sorensen. Jesse Sorensen was also at the Dudleys. He was actually there when the whole Zima Ion incident happened. I don't know if you remember that, but Zima Ion went for a backflip off of the top rope and landed on top of Jesse's head and fractured his neck in like 3 different places.
Yeah.
And there was some heat between the different schools, the one that Zima trained at and the 3D Academy, because it was like Jesse was a boy. Like I was ready to somebody up because he's just this like very quiet, nice southern guy, and somebody screwed his crap up. So yeah, it was expensive, and I wish I could have stayed longer. But I also was 23 or 24. I had never moved away from home, and I was 3,000 miles away from home, not knowing a freaking person. And let me tell you, it's tough. Trying to be in the wrestling industry when you don't know anybody is really hard. It's even harder when I knew one person. I had a roommate that I stayed with when I was in Florida, and that was the only person that I knew. Everybody else was foreign to me, and it was like a different world. Florida is completely a different world than California.
Well, yeah, and I mean, like as a world-renowned traveler myself, California is very different from everywhere. Like, I was just in Nashville a couple of months ago, and you go to like East Nashville, and it's like, oh wow, it's like a lot like LA. Yeah, but that's it, man. And you go to other parts of it, it's completely different. You go down Broadway. Hell, Broadway felt like Long Beach with live music, but outside of that, it was a completely different universe. And whether it be Orlando or Atlanta or Nashville, I mean, it's all different. Nothing is the same as it is here in California. And I'm not, for those of you guys watching, I'm not just trying to say California is great. I know that your own unique city and state is very awesome too. It's just, this is very unique for us. And our boy Willie Bowen says California #1.
Yes, California #1. No, but I tried very hard to make it out there, but again, it just wasn't my cup of tea. So I came back, and there was definitely that feeling of regret and anger that I didn't stick it out longer. But it got to the point where I was living in an apartment complex. They called them week-to-week motels in Florida. They didn't have apartment complexes. There was a literal drug bust in the unit next to mine. Like 3 o'clock in the morning, Florida FBI shows up, like 8 or 9. The SWAT team is outside of our apartment complex. My roommate, who's like 4'10", dives underneath the bed, and I'm like, shit, I'm gonna die at 24. There was a meth lab being made at the apartment next to mine in Orlando. I kid you not. They even pulled off the door, and it was yellow. The door was yellow from the meth being cooked in the apartment. So it was not a good place.
That's wild, man. Now, I know you said that there's no topic off the table, and so that's what I want to ask you, because you have battled addiction.
Yeah.
you've successfully battled addiction, and I'm very proud of you for that. I don't know if I ever told you that, but I'm
No,
very
you have a
proud of
lot
you.
to do with it. You have a lot.
Well,
You don't know how much our discussions kept me sober.
yeah, well, I'm glad I helped in any way. We've been friends for probably about 15 years now, 14
Yep.
years now,
Yep.
long time,
Yep.
and I'm proud to see that you stepped away from the business because I think that's what you needed at the time. And
Mm-hmm.
you got a beautiful wife, you got a beautiful daughter, you have this beautiful life. But let's talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you get down to that road? Because you grew up, in California. You grew up in Woodland Hills in a nice
Yeah.
community. Your
Yep.
mom and dad are good people. You
Yep.
know, as far as I know, you don't have a history of abuse from your parents
Nope.
or
Nope. My
family. So
parents are awesome. Nope.
what 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 took you down that path?
So I got real swallowed up by what a lot of people in the industry have, and it's this high of performing. I got really lucky really early on that I got to Billy Blade, who I know has a lot of heat with a lot of people in California, but that dude took so many chances on me. He let me work with just people that I idolized growing up. Well, growing up is relative. Yes, I started watching when I was 13, but still, when you're a nerd like I am and you get beat up a lot, those kinds of people were my idols. And I didn't really have wrestling in a lot of ways was the ability for me to be able to be a different person. I was never Jay Greenfield. I was always Jay Stone. And so regardless of what I did as Jay Stone, I could just compartmentalize it and say, oh, it's not me, it's somebody else. And I took full advantage of that. What I ended up doing was I ended up developing a pretty serious pill addiction because I was constantly needing to feel that high that I felt when I was performing. And what ended up happening was I developed this real problem with living in the real world because I got so used to living on a day-to-day basis, driving anywhere I wanted to. I drove constantly. And, I would experience these awesome moments. And then after I was done, I could not handle reality. I could not handle the day-to-day life. And there's a lot of guys that have that. Unfortunately, we lost Scott Hall. He couldn't handle the reality. The fact of the matter was, is I got to be Jay Stone, especially the last 3 or 4 years before I quit. I was Jay Stone 100% of the time. That was my shoot job. I didn't have a job other than wrestling the last 3 or 4 years, which is an honor. It was a fucking honor to be able to say that I got to do it as a job. But it gets so hard. It gets so hard to quantify what you are as a person because the industry has a real problem with swallowing people up. And it became to the point where I remember going to a show in Portland and I swapped pills with a wrestler who will remain unnamed because I think it's disrespectful to say who it was. Because he's a father and a very successful business person, and I don't want to ruin that. But we swapped pills on the plane, and I had 3 or 4 beers at the venue, and I OD'd in the hotel room. And I've hardly ever told this story to anybody, but I did tell you that this was going to be a shoot, which it is. And the only reason I know I survived was there was a commentator named Pat Kelly, who you might have known from Chris Jericho's podcast. He was just on it a couple of weeks ago. He's like the godfather of Northern California ring announcing. He's like in his 70s and he's been doing it for 50 some odd years. And he came and checked on me. Otherwise, apparently I was in a van not breathing. It got really bad. And that had a big effect on me because at the worst of it, I got down to 140 pounds. And I'm 5'11". So 5'11", 140 pounds is not a good look. And I think that the industry swallowed me up because I started when I was very young.
And I mean, for context, you're a thin guy already.
Yeah.
But 140 at your height is really thin.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what ended up happening was I took that and I ran with it. I sort of said, I let the industry take me over. And I think that a lot of guys have gotten into this problem, and that is that they think the industry is bigger than, or that they're bigger than the industry, right? And so what ends up happening is these guys have this issue with, you have no life outside of wrestling. Wrestling is all encompassing, right? And I never did it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I performed in front of millions of people on a weekly basis, right? I had the WCWC Paragon thing, which was a blip for a hot minute, but most of my shows were just local. They were in front of 200 or 300 people.
Yeah.
I got freaking hooked to the extent that I could not live a normal life. And there are guys in this industry that have had it a lot worse than I have, and that have thrived. And it's so good to see guys like, Hammerstone and Killer Cross, and the list goes on and on of guys from WCWC that have had just monumental successes in the industry. And it's so cool to see guys that have made it. But yeah, I had a tryout with WWE in 2014, and then we'll transition out because I know that it's been an hour. But I had a tryout with WWE. It's actually 8 years ago today. It was completely it was
just
not
happened to work out that way.
Happenstance. And so the tryout blew up. It did not go well. Two guys got into a shoot fight in the performance center.
Who?
I don't know. Two jobbers got into a shoot fight. They were neither one of them were involved in the wrestling industry. I don't remember. I drank 140 ounces of beer that night. I don't even remember what my own name was that day.
We wanted the dirt. This is a dirt sheet program.
I don't remember. One guy was a wrestler. One guy was a football guy. They were doing a headlock, and they started shit-talking each other during the headlock. Dusty, rest in soul, that was like 6 months before he died. He looked horrible. He looked awful. And it was really hard to watch him and Robbie Brookside and Canyon Seaman and say that name 5 to 6 times and try not to laugh.
Was Pearce there at that point?
No, this was way before. This is when Ryan first started at WWE. He had been there like 2 months when I had my tryout. I was like the 3rd or 4th ref ever to have a tryout at the Performance Center. It was when like Bailey had first started, because I worked with Bailey a lot in NorCal. And yeah, they ended up cutting the tryout. They sent everybody home a day early.
Wow.
So I got to bump 3 times in the ring before Bill DeMott said, "Referees don't bump, get the fuck out of my ring." And I was like, I'm sorry. But yeah, I got to take 3 bumps in a WWE ring. That is the extent of, and I think that's a perfect sequitur for the fact that my refereeing career came so close to being great, yet was so far from being good. Like,
so wow, man. So okay, so just to recap,
yes,
you're in Southern California, returning from the Team 3D Academy. You're working with Jeff Manning up at WCWC. You're working in SoCal with Championship Wrestling from Hollywood.
Yep.
You're getting dates with the IWL.
Yep,
you're getting dates with some of the other smaller indies in the area.
Mm-hmm.
You get an opportunity to go to the WWE Performance Center. You're trying out in front of Dusty freaking Rhodes, Bill DeMott, Ryan Katz is there, our pal. I mean, we also forgot about Millennium Pro Wrestling too. Don't want to leave those guys out.
No, I love those guys. But no, yeah.
Your head is spinning. You're battling these demons that nobody even knows about. Mm-mm. Where were you mentally at that point?
The lowest I've ever been in my entire life. I was thinking about suicide, to be honest, especially after the tryout fell apart. It got to a point where I didn't really care who I was. So I was very vehemently against being Jay Greenfield, because that was somebody else, right? That wasn't me. And so at that point, I was on the highest of highs. I had been wanting to do this since I was 13, right? Which doesn't seem like that much. It's only 10, 12 years at that point.
Right.
But when you put in perspective that I did nothing else. Well, I graduated college and that was it.
It's all relative, right? Because, if you put your heart and soul into something, it doesn't matter when you start, when you're there and you're experiencing success, and for that to be taken away from you, or hiccups in the road, being at Team 3D Academy, like you're literally living the dream. This isn't it's It's not a 3-hour drive to San Bernardino. It's literally you uprooted and are living in Orlando to
Yeah.
accomplish this dream. And then when that stops, and then you get back to a solid ground, but then you go to the WWE tryout, and then that stops, and you start seeing this momentum go. I mean, I could see why that would be difficult for you.
Yeah, then I got to go move to Oregon, and I did the Paragon Pro Wrestling stuff, and that again was so close to blowing up, but it didn't.
Let me ask you, before we get to Paragon Pro and WCWC, in relation, I know that there was supposed to be a tour with a German wrestling promotion. I know you were very excited about that.
Oh,
And we talked
yeah.
about that quite a bit. Like, I was excited for you. I was kind of living vicariously through you. You were telling me, "Oh yeah, man, I got my passport. I'm getting ready to go." And then everything kind of the rails fell off. What happened?
So that is a very good question. I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that I started promoting it on my social media, and Drake Younger somehow got involved, and I got pulled from the show. Like, I had bought the tickets. I still don't to this day know exactly what the hell happened, but I can say that I was ready to go. I had got my passport. I got the show. It was supposed to be that, my guilty pleasure is deathmatch wrestling. It's not even a guilty pleasure. I just love deathmatch wrestling. Like, I always have, always will. And um, I found out like two days before that there was a discussion with management, and they decided that my services were not wanted at that show. And so I had to get a partial refund off of $1,000 ticket that I paid for out of pocket, round trip, because I wasn't gonna stay there for that long. And I remember being at the airport in Orlando, coming back home, and this is like right on top of each other. Like June was my tryout with WWE. October was the show in Germany, and there was just this moment of pure unadulterated sadness that came right after. I mean, the moment that I found out that I had gotten the tryout, I sat on the floor and wept. I mean, like, ugly cried on the floor, because it was like, this is a culmination of my entire life, and all of those opportunities kind of fell into my lap at once. And I think I had been more mature, it may have gone differently. But I I had a big mouth, and I think I might have said something to the wrong person, and they decided to pull the show for me. But yeah, it happened like weeks before I was supposed to go.
Wow. And the real bummer about that, like you said, you came out of pocket. I remember you telling me, in maybe I'm wrong, and please correct me if I am, but I think you told me, like, look, they're not even paying me enough to cover the travel. This is just a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah,
So, like,
yeah.
even if you would have went, you still were going to be financially at a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I mean, you can't replace that experience, but
No, no. It's on my resume. It was another notch in the belt, and that was a huge thing that I had, was the notches on the belt, right? Like,
right.
meeting with the Team 3 Academy, doing a live main event on Championship Wrestling from Hollywood, getting to do the 7 levels of hate. There were so many opportunities that I had throughout my career, and that was one of the highlights, by the way, doing the 7 levels of hate. And Adam Pearce, if you're listening, thank you. That's all I have to say. I don't think I ever just told Adam thank you, because that man has done more for more guys in California than just about anybody other than Jesse.
It's almost obscene how many people don't realize what that guy did for this area, what him and Dave Marquez collectively did for this area. And I
And he
don't
still
think
does.
anyone will ever really acknowledge just how important they were to this scene. And
Yes.
it's a shame, because both those guys really deserve a ton of credit. And I'm so happy to see Adam on TV every week. I mean, living the dream. That bump card still has two more bumps on it, I'm sure, though. I just want to see him in the ring one more time.
I do too, but I'm so happy that he doesn't have to bump. But that was another guy who I think those opportunities were all just moments in life. And I sit here with no regrets, but I do have what ifs. And I think, had the industry not eaten me up as badly as it had, things may have been different. But I also would not be in Oregon, because I moved here for another opportunity, and I ended up
let's talk about WCWC, your time there, and your time with Paragon, because that was a big deal. During that time, there was a big divide between Dave Marquez and
Jeff Manning.
yeah, I forgot his name. I knew Manning. I just couldn't think of the first. Anyways, and it was a big deal, and it sucked because there was a lot of people who were on both sides. A lot of people were forced to choose. A lot of people easily took the road to Oregon. Some people fought with that decision, but ultimately made that decision. Mikey O'Shea, Big Duke. There's a few other guys too. I can't think who.
Hammerstone.
Hammerstone. Well, Hammerstone was really not working with Marquez at that point, so
okay.
it wasn't really like no bad feelings there. But like,
there was a lot of guys.
Yeah, and it was like, I know Nick Madrid was one of the guys that ended up not going out there. But you were one of the guys that ended up taking that opportunity.
Yes.
Was that a hard decision for you to make?
So at first it seemed relatively easy. I mean, the guys that I knew were working there, and then there was that really weird divide that happened, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that
Sorry.
Adam's indie scene is incredible. But there was a huge divide, and that was because Jeff Manning had he had an idea of what wrestling should be, and it was not what it was, and it was never what it was. And Dave Marquez lived on planet Earth, and Dave knew what he was doing, because Dave has managed to weather 35 economic storms, everybody and his mother leaving, everybody quitting on him multiple times. He's like that ex-girlfriend in high school that everybody dates but nobody wants to marry, and then they all end up realizing that he's the right person at the end of the day. Right? Yeah. Like, who goes to China? Who goes to China?
I went to China.
I know you did. Dave Marquez goes to China, and Alex Chamberlain took the Paragon belt with him to China, which I thought was the best thing ever.
I begged Dave to let me post the photo, and he's like, "No, I'm going to do it." I'm like, "Please, Dave, please!" Like, "No, I'm going to do it."
Yeah. So it was a very different. It was two very different mindsets of wrestling. One was intelligent, and the fact of the matter is that there was so much money and so much talent in that locker room, in that Paragon locker room. So much talent, just ungodly amounts. And Vegas is such a hard place to run. But the fact of the matter is that there was this opinion that you were either with us or you were against us. And I moved out here under that perspective of like, F Marquez and F the NWA and like, what was it? No Way Affiliated and all of this stuff that was really counterintuitive. And the fact of the matter was, we were wrong. I was wrong. And I was very much on the Morty camp. I mean, to the extent that like, I blew some friendships over that whole thing. And I think I really rubbed a lot of people wrong, and people that were good to me, people like Adam, that I've never said this out loud, but I've always wanted to apologize to him for how much of an idiot I was. I just got swallowed up by the industry, and I let myself get taken advantage of to the point where I basically told everybody in SoCal that they were idiots for not coming up here. And Dave still runs shows. There's hardly any. The Portland scene's being rebuilt by guys like Ricky Gibson and the American Guns, and Defy is doing an incredible job of bringing back wrestling up here. But it took years. That scene up here was destroyed because there was so much ego and so much that was not helpful. Like, what rivalry?
Why was Paragon treated differently from WCWC? Why wasn't it just one promotion in two different territories?
NXT versus WWE. It was kind of like that. One was supposed to be the IT program, and one was supposed to be like the breeding ground for the IT program.
But didn't one of those programs actually make money, and the really nice one cost a lot of money?
100%, yeah, 100%. WCWC had a great audience, and they were drawing really well.
You could
hair
go,
bang.
and I'm sorry, you guys could go search that right now. You can type in WCWC on the YouTube browser when this interview is done, and you'll see like they had pretty good crowds. And I mean, it wasn't like there was
300, yeah.
superstars on the card. Gangrel was on the card. Our pal Mikey O'Shea was on the card. I'm not saying anything bad about Mikey O'Shea, but he's not a WWE legend.
Mm-hmm.
And they did pretty good numbers.
Yeah, they did. We did real good numbers, and that's the shame is that Pop TV kind of fell through, and that was the first real hiccup. Pop TV was supposed to be like our savior.
Yeah,
and they ended up getting back with Impact.
Yeah.
Real quick.
Well, wait. So help me out real quick with Paragon. You get that show took place in Sam's Town Live, right?
Originally, it was at the one of the other casinos. It was not originally at Sam's Town, and then they couldn't draw well enough to be at that venue, so they moved to Sam's Town. And Sam's Town was on a Tuesday, and Vegas, there's 100 things to do at any given time. We could not draw. And I ended up leaving about 6 or maybe 8 to 10 months into it. I met my now wife. She was my girlfriend at the time, and I decided to move forward with that. I was actually offered a full-time wrestling spot or refereeing spot in France, and I actually decided to go on one more date before moving to France. I had gotten my this will be my last thing before we call it, but the thing about it is that I ended up having an opportunity in France or going on one more date with this woman, and it ended up being my wife. And here I am, 6.5, 7 years later, and I have a kid, 2 dogs, a cat, 2 bunnies, and a house, and I work a day job. I could be living in France.
And it's a big house because there's a lot of internet issues.
Yeah, see that flex? See that little flex right there? So,
okay, we kind of skipped over it, but you were talking about your addiction.
Yes.
When did you get clean?
2014, August 16th, 2014.
So you were out of the business at that point, or you were getting close to being out?
I had 4 months sobriety when I quit. I had 4 months sobriety when I decided so I quit February 2015. I got sober August of 2014 because Morty, Jeff, Mark, whatever you want to call him, would not use me when I was using because I was a liability. Like I OD'd at his event. Like I could have died, and I probably should have with the amount of substances that I was taking at that one time, Xanax and Norco and booze. And then 4 months later was when I decided to retire. But I do want to say something before I'm actually going to be training again. I've decided that my wife and kid wanted to see what Daddy did when I was younger, and so I've actually decided to start training with Oregon Pro Wrestling School, which is run by Ricky Gibson, who is one of the guys that is highly responsible for the regeneration of pro wrestling in the Pacific Northwest. And so 2023, I will be probably working 1 to 2 shows a year, just so that my daughter can see what brought me to Oregon. Because as you know, there's nothing better than a daughter's eyes when they see what Daddy does.
You'll get me to tear up when we start talking about kids, but man, correct me if I'm wrong. We're talking about the Midnight Heat, right? Okay. I just want to make sure I had the right guy in mind. Okay.
Oh, you're totally right.
That's awesome, Jay, and I'm very happy for you, man. I'm happy to hear about that. Again, like we've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes, but I feel like we barely scratched the surface because there's so much to talk about. Real quick, who do you want to throw under the bus?
Jesus, who do I want to throw under the bus? I think I already did throw him underneath the bus. Look, ultimately, my time in Oregon was great for a lot of reasons, but it was also horrible for a lot of reasons. And I think the fact of the matter is that I can say it this way: Dave Marquez won. Like, I feel like I'm the guy from WCW at the end. I feel like I was in the Booker T main event WCW days.
Yeah.
And Dave was like WWE, and at the end, it's him going. And I think we know who won. And I have a lot of regret about which side I picked.
You can always reach out to Dave and tell him, "Hey, man, love you. Sorry." He like, look, Dave could be an asshole, right? Like, you know this.
Yes.
But I also think he knows, like, if someone humbles and says, I'm sorry, he's quick to forgive, too. At least I think. I don't know.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm sorry, Dave.
Like,
And I don't
Dave,
know who's going to hear this. I don't even know who's going to hear this. I'll probably get like threats or whatever, but
you're not going to hear anything from Dave or Adam, I'll tell you that much. They're not watching this shit. Sorry, guys. So, yeah, man, I'm all kidding aside, you are somebody I've known for a very long time in the business. You've always been very transparent about the issues that you faced. I've always been very hopeful and helpful and wanting to see your success. And it's as a friend, as someone who, I mean, look, we even did stupid podcast together some
yes.
10 years ago.
Oh my god. Oh my
And
god. We got to do a part 2. The podcast network, that whole y'all like wrestling thing was just some of the most incredibly random and awesome times of my entire life.
it was a lot of fun, but I also feel like we bonded, and it came a long road from me like trying to avoid you at SoCal Pro to genuinely being sad when you left the area, and to see to be the spectator on the side of the road and seeing the life that you've built for yourself with your bride, with your baby, with all the fur babies. I mean, it's awesome, dude. I'm very happy for you, and I'm very, very glad to see that you survived what could have been a very
the opposite of the throwing people under the bus. There's a couple of people I really want to highlight. There's you, there's Sam Knight, there's Eduardo Esparzo, who's known as Spectre, and then there's Eric Weinberger, and then the roommate that I had in Florida when I was both in WWE tryout and then also when I was living there, Ryan and Dan. Those were about the 7 or 8 people that when shit went real sideways, that stuck around. And I don't think if I had that support system, I probably would have survived. And I would have been another side, asterisk on the gigantic list of the industries chewing you up and spitting you out kind of thing, which it still ended up doing. But at least I survived to see it.
Think of it this way, man. Like you said it yourself. The industry chewed you up and spit you out, but you didn't let that define you as who you were as a person, and you were able to walk through it. So I mean, you got to take some pride in that, and I'm sure sure your wife is very happy that you did that.
Look, let me tell you something. I got to be in the industry for about 10 years. 3 of them, that was my only job. I didn't have a day job. That was the most stressful of years of my career because it was a day job. Well, day job is kind of relative. I was working 3 times a week, let's be honest. But it was very stressful. But I have a lot of things that I can be thankful for. I got to be on national television. I got to travel across the United States. I got to do shows with people I idolized, like Matt Hardy and X-Pac. X-Pac was my absolute idol. Getting to work with him, granted I had to wear gloves because we were worried about his illnesses, was one of the highlights of my life. Getting to the radio network and seeing how successful it was, that's something that's gotten me jobs. Like that's gotten me shoot jobs because I showed people how successful that radio station was. I don't think you realize that we were like number 3 or number 4 on the Blog Talk network for like months consistently.
That was because of you guys, not because of what we were doing over here.
No, you guys had a lot to do with it, and it was all of our successes. And that's the part to me that you can take away from all of the shit that happened, all of the horribleness that happened. The fact of the matter is that I had this opportunity to do things that a lot of people hated me for. And I think that I'm going to sound cocky as crap right now, but I think part of the reason why I got as much crap as I did was because I went ahead and took it. And I do need to say rest in peace to Ryan Castellucci. He was one of the good guys in Arizona. And unfortunately, he just passed away within the last 2 days. Again, another guy. And, between talking about good guys, we lost Percy. That had a lot to do with why Percy's death destroyed me. I mean, like I was at the God's door when he went. Like that for me, outside of like all the drinking and crap, he was probably the closest I would have had to wanting to end it all. because that was how much that guy meant to so many of us. And I'm not even me, Ricker, Adam, just the number of guys that Percy had such an incredible impact on. Him and Adam, like, we could go on for hours. We could go on for hours about Percy. And about
real quick, I got to throw my Percy story in too. Yes. I did not have the connection you had with him. I mean, I remember seeing you go grab him Subway. Dave, I'm hungry. And I remember you guys grabbing him food and stuff. And I remember I sat there, and this was right about the time that the NWA split from Championship Wrestling from Hollywood. That they were dropping the title in Australia. And I was talking to Dave about who could potentially be the next world champion. And we all thought it was going to be Damian Wayne, right? And we started going down the names of who was going to be in that matchup. And Percy started chiming in, just like one of the guys. And he's like, "Oh, I heard of him." And we talked about Chance Prophet, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I managed Chance Prophet." And I was like, I'm having an NWA wrestling conversation with Percy Pringle right now, and it blew my mind. Yeah.
The first time he ever recognized my face, I went that, and when Chavo recognized my face at Grimm, he goes, "Oh, I don't have to train any more greenhorns. Cool, Jay Stone's here." I went, "Fuck! Like, what world am I living in?" But anyways, it's been such an honor, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this. I feel like I could talk to you for days, because there's just so much incredibleness that happened in my 10 years. But
well, the next time you come on, we're just going to do an expose on Paragon Pro Wrestling. We'll just spend an hour talking about that.
There's years worth of crap on that. There's years worth of stuff. Like how I just walked out. I just straight up left. I said, "I'm out of here, and you're not paying me enough," and I quit. I walked out the front door. That's
the cliffhanger for the next episode. Jay, as always, man, my brother, I was very happy to speak with you. But we are coming up the hour and a half, so we should probably call it a day. I do appreciate you being here. Of course, for those of you guys watching, this is the Alliance Guys podcast. These are sessions with Jay Cal. Jay, if they want to follow you on the socials, how can they do that?
Referee Jay Stone and Facebook.com/Jay Stone. I'll be starting to update it more now that I'm going to start taking shows again.
You better start advocating for that the school that you're going to be going to.
Yes, Oregon Pro Wrestling School. I will definitely be blowing up social media with that. Ricky Gibson and Oregon Pro Wrestling School. That'll be where it's at.
I like both those guys. Ricky Gibson has been very kind. He'll share stuff that I tweet and retweet. And we're friends on TikTok, so I think that makes us official, right?
Yeah, you're like besties.
Yeah. All right, well, that'll do it then. Until next time, guys, we'll see you at the matches. Jay, thanks again, and we'll see you tomorrow for the pre-party. Thanks for joining the stream. This has been a presentation of Alliance-Wrestling.com. We genuinely appreciate your support. Would you consider subscribing so you'll never miss a future episode? I'd also like to remind you we do a live stream every Tuesday at 5 p.m. before NWA Power. You can find us on social media at The Alliance Blog, and until next time, we are The Alliance.